U.S. officials have reportedly agreed to the framework of a deal with the Taliban that could end America's 17-year war in Afghanistan. In an interview with the New York Times, Zalmay Khalilzad, a U.S. special envoy to Afghanistan, said an agreement has been drafted. The deal would require all foreign troops to withdraw from Afghanistan. In return, the U.S. wants a guarantee from the Taliban to prevent terror groups from creating safe havens in the country. But some are skeptical about the potential agreement. Michael Morell is a former acting director of the CIA. He's now a CBS News senior national security contributor. Mike, thanks so much for being here. It's great to have you to talk
Good
about
to be here,
this. So at a press briefing today, Sarah Sanders said that the administration's priority is to end the war in Afghanistan and ensure there's never a base for terrorism in Afghanistan again. Based on what we know and what you know about the outlines of this deal, does the goal seem to be to get troops out sort of as quickly as possible, or is there a clear and tangible benefit here for the United States?
When the president announced that he was leaving troops in Afghanistan indefinitely, right, the argument he made was that if we leave, the Taliban would take over and Al-Qaeda would come back and the Taliban would let them come back and they would start plotting against us. There is nothing, Elaine, that has changed, and there's nothing in this framework agreement that we now have in front of us that changes that fundamental truth. The Taliban will lie to get foreign troops out of the country. The Taliban has no intention of negotiating in good faith with the Afghan government, and its commitment not to allow terrorists to have safe haven is worth nothing. They will, Elaine, go after ISIS because they're opposed to ISIS, because ISIS wants to push the Taliban out. But the relationship between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda is deep. They have fought side by side for 18 years. They are intermarriages. They are blood brothers, and the Taliban will allow Al-Qaeda to come back. So the president really has a choice to make, I think, and the choice is to leave, and I can understand the desire to leave. But if he leaves, he has to have a strategy to mitigate the threat that will come from Afghanistan.
Because how do you even enforce a deal like this?
You can't enforce it, right? As soon as you leave, the Taliban would go on the attack. And I believe that when we leave, the Taliban would be knocking on the doors of Kabul within 6 months. So the Taliban's going to take over if we leave. So we have to have a strategy to mitigate the comeback of Al-Qaeda. That strategy might be having military bases somewhere in Central Asia from which you could conduct counterterrorism operations. But if you're going to leave, you have to have that mitigation. Otherwise, you're going to have to stay for the long term, just like we had troops in Western Europe to face the Soviet Union all those years, and just like we have troops in South Korea for all these years dealing with North Korea. Those are the two choices we have, right? And walking away without that mitigation is extraordinarily dangerous for the United States.
So U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad met with Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani, who said in a televised address the country wants foreign forces out, but doesn't want a deal to be rushed. Now, the Taliban has reportedly not talked with the government of Afghanistan. Is peace possible if the two sides won't meet?
So what the Afghan president was doing in his comments in response to this framework agreement was basically saying, hey, at the end of the day, the Taliban needs to negotiate with us. What they do with you really doesn't matter. It's us that matters. Don't leave us out of this. He said what he said about foreign troops for domestic consumption.
It's a bit of political posturing.
Political posturing domestically. He wants U.S. troops and coalition troops there for the foreseeable future.
Well, is this approach to achieving peace in Afghanistan a departure from how Defense Secretary Jim Mattis would have advised President Trump?
So I think what's happened here is that when the president made his decision to keep troops there, it was Mattis winning a debate with the president. The president's instincts were to leave. I think what's happening now is the president's instincts are starting to dominate policy. He's already announced a reduction in U.S. forces in Afghanistan. So I think the president wants out. I think a deal with the Taliban makes it look good as we would leave, but it doesn't solve our fundamental security problems.
Last question for you. Connect the dots, if you will, based on your experience in this area of what that would mean to the level of threat to the U.S. homeland if, in fact, U.S. forces were to just pull out as is being described?
There's a long history, Elaine, of terrorist groups who are degraded and significantly degraded, bouncing back in a very fast way. So I'd say if we left, Taliban would take over in 6 months. Al-Qaeda would have safe haven again. I think 2 years after that, we'd be facing a 9/11 style threat here from Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan.
Within
so 2.5 years.
Wow. All right. On that note, Michael Morell, Mike, sobering picture, but really important to have your perspective. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you.